If you're a banjo player in North Carolina, then you've heard of Charlie Poole. He was a lint head, born in Alamance County.
If the river was whiskey and I was duck, I'd dive to the bottom and I'd never come up with daily.
Country music seems to need the legend of the drunken, hell-raising and hell-bound hillbilly genius. It's part of its character. It seems entwined in its DNA, much like the doomed princes of jazz or the hotel room smashing wild men of rock music. And while Hank Williams lives so large in terms of that particular legend that he typifies it in its entirety for country music, in terms of mixing hell-raising and scintillating musicianship, Charlie Poole wrote the damn book. He wrote the damn sequel, and he wrote the foreword to Williams's and Lefty Frizzell's and George Jones's vast volumes of misdeeds. But Poole was more than a mere legendary rounder. He was the first bona fide superstar of hillbilly music. Vernon Dalhart had a huge hit with the wreck of the Old 97 in 1923. It was more of a steady seller over 20 years, ending up selling many millions of copies before they finally took it out of circulation. But Poole was a big seller pretty much from the get-go. While his first single sold only 5,000 copies, when they flipped it over to the B-side, Don't Let Your Deal Go Down, that sold over 102,000 copies in 1926, almost all of them in the South, where it was estimated there were only 6,000 record players in houses. It's understandable, too, that he became a star. Poole's bawdy, straightforward vocal style with its heavy Piedmont accent, rings of authenticity in his band the North Carolina Ramblers, usually a fiddle and a guitar player backing Poole's unique banjo style. They were a tight and urgent combination, and their playing constantly superb. If Poole isn't ground zero for country music, then he's certainly the first aftershock, and he was the tidal wave that followed. He cut around 60 songs, and every one of them is fantastic. If the River Was Whiskey, Old and Only in the Way, Baltimore Fire, Milwaukee Blues, You Ain't Talking to Me, which was quoted by Bob Dylan in his Nobel acceptance lecture, Take a Drink on Me, Hungry Hash House, and Goodbye Booze are all particular classics. These records are the patterns not only for the country music to come, but also presage the development of bluegrass, the first and one of the most significant offshoots of country music. Poole didn't write his own songs, he sang old songs, or he appropriated pop songs from a generation before, and he gave them to the folk song form. He did record a couple of sides of waltz tunes and some classical banjo pieces, but they didn't sell very well. He knew what the people wanted to hear, and he played them that. And when he didn't have the songs to sing, or he'd drunk up all his money, he went back to working alongside them in the mills. But, or maybe so, the people in the shanty towns outside the mills, or from the mining camps that Poole rambled through singing and drinking and fighting, they loved him. He was quite possibly the first true populist folk hero of the American mass communication era. He was a voice, however, flawed and contradictory, of his people in those changing times as they were feeling pressured to abandon a way of life and its attendant values due to economic and social factors intimate to its time and place, and not shaped by external factors seeking to exploit the talent as a novelty on record, when he was a voice for people who are hurriedly being wiped off the map of America. But all this was not without inherent dichotomy. As much as Poole presented as a man of his people, and his songs were the voice of those people, he always took great care to wear a blue serge suit and a bow tie when dealing with the record company folks from New York City, lest they think he were a hillbilly. His contemporary in success of Jimmy Rogers had a similar quirk. When he was required to perform in costume as the singing brakeman or a railroad hobo, he always made sure he was wearing a pair of white silk socks, just reminding him that he'd come a long way from his hard scrabbling days. One fascinating thing I do find about Poole's music and the songs that he chose is that in his entire catalogue, as brief as that may be, there isn't a single mawkish down-home hymn, no desperate plea to a saviour of pulling back from his booze-loving and honky-tonkin' ways. There's no I saw the light to sing on Sunday morning after the honky-tonk blues of Saturday night. There's no Ernest Tubbsian concept of Saturday sinner, Sunday saint. Charlie Poole was on the highway to hell, and he's singing about enjoying every moment of it. But let us return from speculation metaphysical to speculation more on the times and circumstances of Charlie Cleveland Poole as the lifestyle of Appalachian people evolved in the 1920s. We spoke previously of a great change. That great change was setting as the backdrop of a rural people deracinated by the disruptive effects of industrialization, both through the loss of their local base jobs as factories moved in and then their lifestyles pressurized by the demands of having to seek work and live in communities created around those factories. Hamlet became village, village became town, town became city, through both the increase of population from workers drifting out of the high rural hills towards the factories, but also through the deleterious effects of real estate speculation in the Piedmont Hill area. This all came to a head in the 1928 Rhododendron Festival in Asheville, North Carolina, some 3 hours south of Poole's traditional base around Eden, which was in the Virginia border country. A man called Bascom Lunsford was asked to organise a society show as a spectacle for tourists to gawp at, a display of traditional mountain music, which ended up attracting over 5,000 people to see it, and much distracting and effectively destroying the Rhododendron Festival, which was set up as a local push for tourist dollars and real estate money. So communities were still choosing local traditions and entertainment which reminded them of the lost or receding values over the corporate forms coming from the record companies based in the far-flung entertainment capitals and the wishes of the people who were looking to push them out of those traditional values. Charlie Poole was a romantic and possibly over-romanticised figure emerging from the people who sang the songs of the Hill People's tradition, but as mentioned wore a blue serge suit and a bow tie so the people wouldn't take him for a hillbilly. He was an illiterate that was quoted by a Nobel Prize winner for literature in their acceptance speech.
You ain't talking to me, no, you ain't talking to me.
The notion of getting above one's raising is still a potent force today, but Poole, through force of personality, seems to have transcended. And that force of personality in a musician who was a peerless showman. Some say he was the best clog dancer in North Carolina, and he was particularly famous for his flips and cartwheels and handstands he'd spontaneously perform from the stage. Perhaps people buying more of Poole's records than there were record players was more about people simply wanting a souvenir of Poole, a token of their affiliation with him, than his actual product, which effectively made Charlie Poole a genuine celebrity, one birthed and celebrated hundreds of miles from the nearest great white way of celebrity. It might be that the fatal telegram summoning Poole to the great mecca of all that is celebrity may have been a suitably ironic denouement for the homegrown people's champion. But I suspect this isn't enough, not for my dedicated viewer. What they really want when they think of Charlie Poole is a tale of bawdy mayhem and affray, of shenanigans of the highest order, of rock star antics in a 10-cent town. Of course, would that every story about Charlie Poole were true, there'd be no time for music, and he wouldn't have lived for as long as he did. This one has many dates, locations, weapons, number of combatants and versions, but I've tried to go with the most realistic sounding one I could. Before he was a famed musician, Charlie ran moonshine. One evening, after returning from a run and bringing a partially crippled brother, Posey Rohrer, he was recovering from surgery for clubfoot, back from Baltimore, the police raided the bootlegger's nip joint where Charlie and his Confederates were playing, and Charlie, being the argumentative type, started a ruckus with a deputy sheriff who told Poole to consider himself under arrest. Poole's reply was predictable: "Consider hell," and he brought his banjo down over the deputy's head, which went through the banjo's body, and these things were made of maple, so it must have really hurt when the cop woke up, and the neck of the banjo was, according to Rohrer, hanging like a necktie on the unfortunate peace officer. At this point, it gets complicated. Charlie went to grab the next weapon to hand, which was Posey Rohrer's fiddle, but Rohrer snatched it back and, despite his to that moment disability, ran for his life. Another deputy then stuck his gun in Charlie's ear and cocked the hammer. Charlie yanked the gun away, but it went off and hit him in the mouth, burning his lips and chipping a few teeth. At that point, they say, Charlie got really mad. Posey Rohrer left behind his walking cane, which Charlie then used to club the remaining deputy hell west and crooked, and walked out, as Posey Rohrer said, bloodied but unbound. When he went up on trial for the fracas, the judge asked Poole if he needed a good lawyer. Poole said, "No, sir, but I could use some good witnesses." Makes George Jones driving his lawnmower 10 miles to get to a liquor store seem kind of penny ante now, doesn't it? But back to our unfolding tragedy. His fatal doom came in 1931. Work as a musician done got hard, and his records weren't selling so well. Poole was notorious for keeping recording royalties to himself for drinking money. It was the discovery of this which led to the disestablishment of the original North Carolina Ramblers. So he went home to his wife Lou Emma, who was Posey Rohrer's sister, and back to work in the mills. Out of the blue in early 1931, he received an offer in advance to travel to Hollywood. For some say to score a film, others say to appear in one, and others say yet to star in one. Whatever the story, Charlie Poole just wasn't the kind of fella you gave a weighty advance of cash to and just expected to turn up on the train to Hollywood in 7 days. No sirree. Charlie did what Charlie did most times when he got a little money together. He went rambling. And indeed didn't he ramble. So Charlie's celebration tour turned into a 3-month death spiral that bended to literally end all benders. When his money was gone and his will to go on were done, old Charlie went home to die. The end came for him at his sister's house, some say romantically, collapsing and expiring on her front porch as he arrived, desperate for her ministrations and forgiveness. He in fact expired in an upstairs bedroom, his last words being, Oh, Charlie's been drunk before.
The blood was running, and I was running too. Give my feet some exercise and nothing else.
The one thing we do know for sure was that on May 21st, 1931, old Charlie finally quit drinking forever. What such a death lacks in romance, pathos, and genuine mystery of silently passing in the back of a Cadillac on some god-forsaken West Virginia back road, it gains in moment, authentically timeless catalogue finally rambled his last. Let us then summarise quickly. We have digressed at length on social factors, cultural genocide, various deeds of shady dealing and carpetbaggery, the drinking, the fights, and a merry old gang of roister-doisters. But the one thing we haven't perhaps spoken on near enough is the music. That's largely because the music tends to speak for itself. Time spent with the playlist included below will amply demonstrate that Poole took his eclectic mix of tunes and undeniable showmanship not just across the Piedmont and Virginia border country, but to dance halls, hootenannies, parties and corn shucks through Virginia, Kentucky, West Virginia, eastern Tennessee, southern Ohio and southeastern Pennsylvania, toting no doubt a load of moonshine with him, always playing for the same people, the displaced and déclassés of the Appalachian Mountains. By 1929, he'd sold millions of records, Columbia frequently having to chase him to record, but radio and a slew of new competitors brought up in the wake of Ralph Peer's astonishing Bristol sessions started to push Poole to the fringes. In 1930, there was an attempt to set him up with a radio program in West Virginia, but, well, 3 guesses as to why that failed. In the end, there was life back in the mills, the ever-forgiving Lou Emma, and eventually a last mad dash to doom. Even as his music adapted, it's unlikely Poole would have. He just wasn't built to think of the future. He was hardwired for the moment. For him to have become a cantankerous elderly statesman like, say, Jimmy Martin was unthinkable, and it was to be a short life but a gay one for Charlie. Poole slipped into obscurity after his death. Posey Rohrer died shortly after him, Lou Emma in 1967, and his son Jimmy from his first marriage at 19 the year after that. Many years later, fans in Ireland paid for the impressive tombstone where he lays, and every year, almost, the Charlie Poole Festival in Eden pays tribute to the town's most notorious ambassador. Poole once said, "If I lose, I win." No more eloquent philosophy could sum up the life of the first titan of American country music.